Hi, thank you guys so much for coming. And I'm going to change streams a little bit. The idea of resilience, I think, means many different things to many different people. And I know you guys have been talking about food resilience and community structure and community coherence. I want to talk a little bit about those ideas in the context of natural disasters. So my name is Rebecca Bendick. I work in the Geosciences department at the University of Montana. And my specialty in research is looking at the mechanics of earthquakes. And this is kind of a useful thing to do because earthquakes are bad. But it's kind of an esoteric thing to do because it mostly involves physics and computers. But one of the things that we do as part of our research work is respond to large earthquake events and try to get there as fast as possible after they happen so that we can make measurements that capture the response of the earth to these complicated forcings. And in doing so, one inevitably is confronted with this, but this is from Kathmandu, Nepal in 2015. And what we see over and over again when we're trying to run field experiments is the huge impact that these events have on communities. And time again now through my career, through 10 or 12 very large event responses, the message is always the same on the ground, that the people who are most affected by natural disasters never saw them coming. So even in places like Nepal, where the scientific evidence is extremely strong that there's high earthquake hazard there, the people who live in the villages on the main Himalayan faults don't have access to that information. And so as a kind of part, or initially a sidebar of our research work, I and my group of students started thinking about, why does the pipeline of information break down somewhere between the scientific community and the people on the ground who are affected by these disasters? What's going on there that makes it so that some people know what's going to happen, but they're not the ones that will be affected by it? And then the people who pay the heaviest price have no access to the information about risk. And this isn't just a sort of like noble endeavor. It's big money too. So this is just a kind of typical decade's worth of natural disasters. And you can see the sums here, $1.4 trillion in total damage from natural disasters in a typical 10-year period, 1.7 billion people affected, and almost 1 million people killed. And this is by a combination of storms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, drought, things like that. And on top of that, those harms are not evenly distributed in space. So some locations and some communities bear disproportionately the brunt of the impact of natural disasters. So this is obviously a map of the United States, and these are color-coded by individual zip codes, and they're color-coded by the cost from major natural disasters summed over that zip code domain. So everything that's red on here, just one little zip code patch, has more than $5 million worth of damage in a decade. And you can see that there are places where there's a huge amount of impact arising as a consequence of natural disasters. The other thing we see when we look at this problem sort of carefully is that resilience, that community preparedness, is a hugely valuable investment. Initially, the kind of first economic analyses of preparedness measures suggest that every dollar invested in community preparedness paid back $4 in losses prevented. Now, with the most recent kind of suite of major natural disasters in the United States, the number looks more like it's 6 to 1. So for every dollar invested in preparedness, communities save something like $6 and maybe even more than that. Every time someone does one of these analyses, it looks like the number is even better for a return on investment. And it's, again, not just dollars. We did this analysis just to take one more look at this problem in a slightly different way, which is we searched the global catalog for damaging earthquakes, pairs of them that were really similar to each other, but that happened in different kinds of communities, that had impacts in different kinds of communities. So this pair are a couple of very famous earthquakes. This is the Tohoku, Japan event that led to like a huge tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. This is the Sumatra event in the end of 2004. And what you see here is like these are very, very similar events. They have about the same magnitude. They were both thrust earthquakes, so they had similar physics. They both generated a tsunami. But look at the difference in fatalities. 228,000 from the Sumatra event and less than 16,000 for the Japan event. And it's not that 16,000 is nothing, but the difference is important. It's not the physics of the earthquake. It's not what happened in the shaking or the tsunami that makes this difference. It's how prepared these communities are. And this example is even more striking. So this is the Loma Prieta 1989 event that's most famous for messing up the World Series. This is the Port-au-Prince, Haiti event. Again, same magnitude. Haiti one was actually a little smaller. These are both strike-slip earthquakes, so they have very similar physics. They both broke through a major urban area with high population density. But look at the difference in fatalities. 63 against 316,000. We don't even really know what this number is because there were whole neighborhoods that were so Latin that there was no one left to say how many people used to live there. So it's really hard to quantify. But this number is a big, big number. This is a really small number. And again, the difference is how prepared was the community for this event and how accessible is information about earthquake hazard between these communities. So maybe you would take from this, and this is an economic problem. Maybe this has to do with the developing world versus the developed world, how much money governments have to throw at a problem. I don't think so. I think it's more about communities and how well structured they are and how much people have information about natural disasters so they can make their own choices about how to be resilient. So all of these like kind of sciencey, nerdy analyses led me to think about my own neighbors and friends and my own community here in Western Montana. How much access do we here have to information about natural disasters? Like there's for sure some. We're not like Haiti, but how easy is it to find out what your risks are and how to prepare for them? I think the closest analog we have is this Oso earthquake in Washington in 2014. The story here is there's this huge landslide, where a big mass of soil slumped off this hill, slid across this river, and buried a subdivision here, killing 67 people. When reporters interviewed the survivors of this, the main story was just like it was in Nepal, in Pakistan, in Iran, in North India. We had no idea that we were at risk from this kind of event. But that is just makes me kind of want to throw up, because here is a map from Oso. This red shape is the Oso landslide body, but all of these other shapes are mapped landslides from the past 5,000 years. So the fact that the people living right here had no idea that they were literally surrounded on all sides by landslides tells me that we have the same problem that causes terrible effects all over the world in the face of natural disasters. People don't know how to get information about their risk and they don't know what to do about that. So why? Why is that? I and my grad students identified some key problems. Number one, the data about natural hazards are really hard to find. So here's a little table. Here are these hazards, hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, floods, landslides, whatever. There are really high quality scientific data sets that map out risk from these things, but they're all over the place. They're in different federal agencies. They're on different web pages. They're in different formats. Some of them are Excel, some are maps, some are every possible kind of data you can think of. So in order, even just to get the scientific data, you have to know where to go. You have to hunt around. You have to be incredibly diligent to find the right version of these things and know how to manipulate the data. Supposing you can do that, suppose you find them, when you do, those data are very technical. So here's the flood assessment, the flood hazard map for the city of Missoula now. And you can see it's color-coded, and you might think, yeah, red's probably bad. But the codes are like A and AE and AH and AO and undetermined, and what does that mean? Like, you have to be an expert in understanding these data once you've found them to make sense of it and figure out what it means for you. And the earthquake assessment is even worse. This is the earthquake hazard assessment for Montana. Here, I mean, maybe like kind of red is bad, but a lot of it's lavender, and that's a very pretty color. So what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Is it just unfashionable? And then even worse, these are in percentages of peak horizontal acceleration relative to G. So that probably doesn't mean anything to any of you guys. It barely means something to me, and I do this for a living. This is not really like usable information. But now suppose you managed to hunt down these data sets, and then you read like 500 scientific papers so you could figure out what they mean. On top of that, the data are not paired with recommendations. So what are you supposed to do? Okay, I'm in the AO zone, so should I call my mom? Should I raise my house on stilts? Should I sell my house? Should I save up frozen hamburger meat? Like, what am I supposed to do to be prepared for the scenario that this represents? And then on top of that, the preparedness data is not customized. So suppose then you were like, okay, well, I know I should probably do something. Let me find out what you're supposed to do in a flood. It's not necessarily helpful to look at what you generally should maybe do in a flood, because what you should do should be specific to your community and your neighborhood and what the infrastructure is around you that's available for your response. So these general kind of like earthquake safety at home pages are great, but in order to map those onto the scientific information that you had to discover and interpret, you would again have to have like a really high level of expertise. And although that is certainly possible, that's a real barrier for people taking sensible and efficient steps to be prepared in the face of natural disasters. All right, this is a problem. The way this currently exists is not amenable to people being really efficient with their decision making. So what if we were to start from scratch? What would we want a natural hazard school to do? We'd want it to be based on the best available science, but we also would want it to use the best practices for communicating to people, to make that translation of the scientific results into like useful recommendations for people who are not spending thousands of hours figuring out what these data mean. We want messaging to be consistent across different kinds of hazards and across different entities, right? Like, you should be hearing the same suggestions and recommendations in the Missoulian and on the Missoula County Emergency Services page and on some kind of source of information about natural hazards. It should engage the community, right? We know from social science studies and also just from living in Missoula that strong communities where neighbors help neighbors and people care about each other are the ones that respond to challenges the most efficiently. So getting all of the community members on board to get ready for natural disasters is a really important part of building a resilient group. And then we'd like to serve this information efficiently. That means on the internet, so you don't have to print and carry around lots of pamphlets or sit down one-on-one with every single person in Missoula or whatever. And then we'd like to have a way of like figuring out how people are using a tool and taking steps to get more prepared. So from these first principles, we actually created a web tool that has a front end and then a bunch of hideous back end software that's called Hazard Ready. And right now there's one implementation for Missoula called Missoula Ready. We just finished about 6 months ago Seattle and King County Ready, and we're just starting Portland and 7 counties around Portland. But what do these things do? Let me show you in a little more detail. We tried to stay faithful to those first principles that we laid out. So I'll show you the site live in a second and we can play around with it. But the idea is there's a map here in a little bar, and you can click on the map or type in your address. And then on the back end, in the background of this tool queries all those scientific maps of natural hazards, and then it spawns a little customized report for that exact location that tells you there's these tabs up here that have all the hazards. If there's nothing up there, it's like, I'll explain that in a second. These are in order by which is the greatest risk to you at that location down to the least. If it's not on the list, it's pretty much no risk at all. And you'll see for Missoula, the volcano never pops up. It's also on your phone, so if you use it on your phone through a browser, so it's not like a standalone app, you can say, use my current location. So it basically like uses your phone's location. So it's not a standalone app, it's a website, but you can also, it has some special functions on the phone. Yeah. And then we stayed away from statistics. So there are these little dials here that tell you your most likely scenario for that hazard and then your worst case scenario. So if you're a worrywart like me, you can read this and be prepared for the worst case. If you're cool and casual like my little brother, you can just think about the most likely scenario. But you can customize kind of your choice about responses. And then down here is how to prepare. These are the recommendations from Missoula City and County Emergency Services about what they would like for you to do to be prepared for whatever hazard you have on the tab. And then here's a section on historical past events that are like what you might expect at that area. So you can see pictures, video, little stories from people about what it was like when there was a big fire at that location. So in the background, there are all these spatial data layers. We get them from wherever is the most current, best available science. So for Missoula City and County, they're coming from a combination of the USGS, FEMA, NOAA, the city and the county. For example, the county has a brand new fire layer. So any map data just gets ingested, and then that gets queried on the fly by the web tool. So, and then here the text like descriptions and recommendations. So in the background, when you type in a location or you click use my current location, the software queries the spatial maps of hazards, and then it pairs the results of that query with text recommendations that match like whatever category of risk you're in. And so that gives like a description of what it would look like or what that event would be like. It has those little dials that tell you how bad, and then also the like preparedness recommendations. So we actually this doesn't search out data on the fly. That's a little scary because there are some high quality data sets and lower quality data sets. So one of the things that we do as a kind of value added besides writing the software is actually making sure that whatever data are being used are what everyone thinks are the best available ones. She just asked me, like, where do first of all, the primary data come from that tell us where the spatial risks are? And then the next question was, where do the recommendations come from? And so part of the implementation of these specific sites, so the site-specific versions of Hazard Ready, include editing the content. So that means finding the best available data, testing it to make sure it's understandable, but then also with the city and county or the entities that we're working with to implement them, we work with them to customize the recommendations for that place. So, for example, like in Missoula Emergency Services really, really wants people to sign up for Smart 911. So I think you probably won't be able to read the site very easily because it's kind of bright in here, but if you go to it later, you'll see that no matter the hazard, under like step prepare, it says register for Smart 911, because that's what they really want us to say. And for example, like down here in this how to prepare section for Missoula, they wanted us to say 3 days of food and water, because that's how long they think it could possibly take to get to areas if they were isolated by a wildfire or flood event or something. Seattle and King County want us to say 6 days. Portland, I haven't decided yet. But part of the process, because like we have this really strong commitment to community engagement, includes working with stakeholders to find out like what recommendations are appropriate for that place. So another kind of side thing we're working on is Kabul Ready. And those recommendations have to be culturally appropriate to Kabul, right? So you can't tell people in Kabul to evacuate because women can't easily travel. So like our recommendations there have to be more focused on like, how do you shelter in place if you're not as mobile as maybe we would be here in Missoula. So a piece of that customization is like utterly absent in the scientific map, but I think utterly critical to allowing communities to really do this stuff. It has to fit who they are. So right now, it's not real time, like there would be no place on it for real time. What we're serving is a kind of like broad view of your general exposure to risk. However, like on the Seattle page, they have this, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. Is there a place to put it? In Seattle, for example, they have these things called the P patches. So they have like local hubs where people can get together and help each other out. And so on the Seattle version, when you enter your location, it tells you where the nearest P patch is. So like if something were happening at the time, it would tell you where you're supposed to go to get help or shelter or get more information. So I think, if I may be sort of braggy, I think the cool thing about this is that it can suck in any kind of data and spit out any kind of content. It's really customizable to place, but it does so by like having a lot of fidelity to those basic principles that we think are important. And like we built this for natural disasters. It doesn't have to even be natural risk. So one of the data sets that we tested this on as a joke was like a zombie apocalypse scenario, and it did fine with that. You could use it with like maps of flu. You could use it with maps of I don't know, equine encephalitis, whatever, anything that has like a spatial component can be ingested in the back and then queried and spawned as information. So and I don't know if you guys want to put in an address that you particularly are interested in. So this shows you that location on the map, and it has, and these are like right now not set up to change with the seasons. So this is your kind of like average highest risk over the whole year. We're just working at the moment on like making it so that if it were spring, flooding would jump to the front. If it were August, wildfire would jump to the front. Maybe right now, winter weather would jump to the front as a risk, but we haven't implemented that yet. So you can think of this more as a sort of 10-year average or something like that. But you can see, so wildfire, there's moderate wildfire potential, mainly because you're within half a mile of the edge of town. So the worst case scenario is a really big wildfire. Here's some preparedness recommendations. And then we have a map of historic fires. So you can see this location hasn't had a wildfire between 1889 and 2013, but nearby there have been. And then if we go up and look at the flooding risk, you can see that the worst case scenario here is well up into this like bad color zone. So I think the worst case scenario is really what we saw this spring. That was a very unusual spring runoff event on the Clark Fork. And so we did a pretty good job. This area is within 500 feet of mapped flood zones. So debris-filled floodwaters could rush into basements. You may need to evacuate. This could last days to weeks. And then there are some safety issues. Don't try to travel through floodwaters. How to get flood ready. Where to find more information. Yeah, there is wherever you query in all of Missoula County, you do get under the wildfire tab. Wildfire smoke can be quite hazardous if you have breathing disorders, if you have asthma, the basic recommendations for that. Yeah. But we don't map the smoke plume in real time and serve information about it that way. Yeah. So my grad student, this started as a master's project. It's obviously growing. We created a little startup company to do it in other places. And we've been kind of doing Seattle and Portland by hook or by crook. But actually I was in Helena on Wednesday, meeting with the Department of Commerce and Natural Resources and the Office of the Governor to explore whether or not we could do the whole state. So maybe Montana Ready's coming soon. And I think one of the things about this that is important for Montana and is a piece of that story I told you about engaging with local communities is in many ways this really speaks to Montana culture in that we really, I think, believe that neighbors should help neighbors and we should be ready to take care of ourselves here in Montana. This respects things like private property rights because it's up to you to make choices about how you want to deal with your property and your family. But you can't make those choices in a sensible way if you don't have access to the basic information in the first place. So I think one of the things about, for example, Japan is a lot of the preparedness is from the top down. It's required by law. It's strongly enforced. But that's a pathway that I don't think works particularly well in Montana, for example, because people don't particularly care to be told exactly how to go about accomplishing some end goal. But with this tool, if you feel like you want to be prepared, you can do that however you see fit. But if you know what you're getting ready for, you're likely to do it in a way that's really efficient and speaks to your own values. So I think that part of this design was inspired by a kind of lifetime of study of natural disasters, but part of it was inspired by what it means to live in a strong and resilient community here in Montana, and how would I go about helping my neighbors and empowering them to help themselves. We really wanted people to be able to go to one place and say, what does this mean for me? And do that in their own way and kind of in their own time. Another piece of something that I'm just absolutely dying to do with this tool is have a little slider on it so that you can look at your risk in the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And we thought we would do 30 years and 50 years so that we can use the best scientific scenarios for climate change and say, you know, how will your wildfire risk change 50 years from now under these climate scenarios, or how does your flood risk change? And I think like just screwing around with the little slider could be like an amazing way for people to get a much more personal understanding of the risk presented by climate change to them. Yeah, I mean, we would want to, again, stay like really true to that basic principle of like what's the best available science. So one thing I've seen from like having, you know, people do this for their own addresses, one thing people feel is like a little bit of relief, because mostly like, can you see this? Like there is the volcano hazard layer is in here, but the probability of a volcanic eruption affecting Missoula County is so much less than like 1 in a million that it never spawns a tab. It never crosses that threshold. So like, I mean, everyone is like, is Yellowstone gonna explode? What's gonna happen to me? And like, it's not gonna explode and nothing's gonna happen to you. And that's like actually a relief if that's something you're worrying about. So this tells you like what to worry about and also what not to worry about. And that's nice. Like you don't have to worry about everything. And you can do some really inexpensive, simple things in most parts of Missoula City and County to be quite well prepared for the likely disasters we're going to have. And then you can worry about gum disease or organic food or all the million of other things to worry about. And you'll be ready for natural disasters and you can check that off your list. So we actually typed in a Tower Street address here. So worst case scenario is, yeah, very likely. But we do not do probabilistic forecasts in this because people don't know how to get their heads around that. Yeah. So I guess in the back end we do probabilistic forecasting. I can't get to the number. I can only see the dial. Like it's likely to be bad at Tower Street. Most people, unless they spend a lot of time with statistics, are not very comfortable with probabilistic. If I say something has like a 7% chance of happening, I mean, we see this over and over again. It's hard for, or even worse, let's say a 37% chance. Does that mean it's going to happen or not? What am I supposed to do with that? It's hard even for people who work with statistics a lot to use that kind of very precise number to make choices. So we did a ton of testing with focus groups, and these dials, people understood better. They could see like, cause really when you're talking about preparedness, you really just want people to think not so bad, so I don't probably have to take action, or kind of bad, so I should probably do things to get prepared. But the difference between 38% over in 10 years or 59% over 10 years is not very meaningful to people. So in the back end, there's that probability calculation being made to spawn the dials, but I can't like get to the number that's getting generated in the back from the hazard maps. And if you like that, you can totally go to the raw data. In fact, there are links at the bottom of every page here. The quick data overview, these are all the data layers that are going into it, and we serve these open source. So you can click on one of these, download the data set, and run the calculation if you like numbers. But it's very rare that people ask me for the actual number. So you're a unique guy. So it's hazardready.org/Missoula. If you just go to hazardready.org, you'll see the Seattle page as well, and shortly here the Portland page. So check it out, type in your address, send me email, tell me what you think, and thanks for listening.